Okay, this is part 3 of How the Catholic Church Built Civilization by Thomas Woods. So it's a book review, but I've added these additional slides just to put stuff into perspective. If you look at Catholicism, there's two main strands of it. Really, Christianity, there's two main strands. There's the Aristotelian strand, and that's mostly the Catholic Church. Okay, and then there is the Platonic strand, and that mostly goes into St. Augustine, which later led into the viewpoint of Martin Luther and the Protestant Church. Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk, okay, and Augustine was very influenced by Platonic philosophy, okay, and Neoplatonism. Okay, so here I'm just showing you some of the ways that you'll be amazed at how many overlaps there are with the ancient Greeks. So one of the things was Zeus was pissed off at Prometheus that he had stolen fire from the gods and given it to man. So Zeus gave to Pandora, who was like the wife of Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus. He gave her Pandora's box, so to speak, and she was told not to open it, but she did, of course, by her curiosity, and that let loose all kinds of problems for the world, all kinds of troubles. All right, so I just think that's a little funny, of course, because it sounds very much like Adam and Eve being tempted by Satan the snake and biting the apple. So there's just two nice paintings of it. Okay, here is Adam and Eve, and we've talked before about how you want to keep your indoor heating and plumbing, the Garden of Eden, and like I said, that's very much like Pandora's box. Genesis 1:29, I put every plant on the earth that'll be your food for you. It's my favorite of the Adam and Eve paintings, the one by Bruegel right there. Here is one making the point about there is an authority above the secular ruler. And this is a famous painting of Antigone. So what had happened was there was a conflict about succession in the kingdom of Thebes in ancient Greece. And the two brothers fought. Antigone is the daughter of Oedipus, and she had two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices. And they fought. And then the new leader who took over, because they killed each other inadvertently in that civil war, the new leader, Creon, decreed that Polynices should be left outside the city and not buried, to be eaten by the stray dogs. And his sister said, no, that's not right, Antigone. And she went and performed a ritual burial of her brother to put dirt upon him. King Creon was incensed by this and declared that she be sentenced to death and buried alive. The daughter of King Creon, the son of King Creon was in love with Antigone. They were engaged. And what happened was when Antigone refused to bow down to Creon, and he was pissed off about that. And here's what she said to King Creon. The laws of the gods are above the laws of man. They have come before the man. The laws of heaven are not of today nor of yesterday, but from all time. Okay, the prophet Tiresias had warned that King Creon should not ignore what Antigone was saying. He declared she'd be buried alive, and she hanged herself in prison. So Creon's son, he loved her, he committed suicide. And then his wife, when she saw that her son had committed suicide and what her husband had done, she committed suicide. The painting, by the way, is by Sebastian Norblin. So basically, King Creon destroyed his family and his kingdom by being such a jerk. And the whole point of it was, as Antigone said, there are laws that come from the gods that are above the laws of men, above the ruler. Okay? The Greeks were like one of the first societies to have all this free speech and whatnot. And, when people follow these things, there's a ripple effect that makes it better for everybody. But this is a typical tragedy of the ancient Greeks, why they were so magnificent, so above all the other ancient civilizations. When the ancient Romans conquered Greece and they started to study them, they were so amazed at how superior the Greeks were. They just adopted like tons of things from the Greeks. They just took their philosophy. They took their mythology. They took their theater, their drama, their literature. Okay, here is Pericles, and like one of the greatest Greek historians is Polybius, The Roman historians is Polybius, the Greek. Here's Pericles' funeral oration as described in the book The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. And there's the great Acropolis, the city on a hill, and that's another symbol of Christianity. The city on a hill, the light of the world. And Christianity is the light of the world. You take winter, Christmas, the middle of the winter, it's a bleak, cold day, except the Christmas lights make it beautiful, make it the best holiday of the year. Without Christianity, it's just winter break, some bleak, austere nonsense. All right, so anyways, that's a magnificent book, by the way, Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War. Now here is Socrates. So Sparta defeated Athens after the death of Pericles. He died in the plague. And Socrates sort of willingly gave his life, and he's considered like the hero of philosophy, the saint of philosophy. And he's sort of an early sort of prototype figure, Christ-like in a sense. He sacrificed himself for what he saw as the good of his community for Athens. Okay, magnificent painting here, The Death of Socrates. All right, and there's Plato at the head of the bed, sad. The students of Socrates are all very sad. And that's partly what motivated Plato to keep on writing. And what kind of a city would, destroy its best man, its wisest and kindest and best behaved man? Okay, here is Odysseus in the Odyssey going down into the underworld to Hades to speak with the prophet Tiresias to get instructions on how he can find his way back to Ithaca, to Attica. And note the parallels of Christian philosophy, this idea of catabasis. Cata means to go down into hell and to seek advice. Here is Odysseus when he was tied to the mast so he wouldn't be seduced by the sirens as they gave their siren song. And just as a Christian should not be seduced by sin. Nice painting there by Draper. Here is Pythagoras, the first vegetarian, encouraging everybody to eat a plant-based diet. And his feeling was they should do it because he believed in reincarnation and thought that animals have souls. And you could be eating somebody's soul in a sense if you ate an animal. But the vegetarian diet up until 1800s was called the Pythagorean diet. Here is the allegory of the cave by Plato. I'm going through these slides about the Greeks because all of this stuff factors very heavily into Christian theology and the Christian worldview because it comes from the ancient Greeks. And the New Testament was written in Greek, okay? Jerome's, Latin Vulgate Bible, that was not the original version of the New Testament. The original version was written in Greek. Okay, so the idea of the cave, Plato's allegory of the cave, is that, the typical average prole chump only sees the shadows on the wall of the cave made by those who tell the stories, and they're all fake manufactured truth to manufacture consent. And that if you want to see the truth, if you want to see the world as it actually is, you need to climb out of the cave like Socrates, and you need the Platonic dialogue, the dialectic, a discussion where you ask a lot of questions and you're able to freely question and seek the objective truth. And so the light of the cave was Socrates, and other people say later it was Aristotle, and then they say the greatest light of the cave, out of the cave was, of course, Christ. Okay, another thing I like about the Catholic Church is it has a sense of humor. And again, it gets that from the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks had a sense of humor. In other societies, if you made fun of the ruler, man, you would get your butt kicked, okay? But the Greeks had a sense of humor. Here's an example of Plato at Plato's Academy, one of the first schools. And he was asked to give a definition of a man, and he was trying to be scientifically sophisticated. He said, man is a featherless biped. So Diogenes, the cynic, plucked a chicken, and he put the chicken on the floor in front of Plato and his students, and he said, behold, Plato's idea of a man, a featherless biped. Okay, so Diogenes, the street homeless philosopher, he was very amusing. He lived in Athens, and one day Alexander the Great was walking by, and he says to Diogenes, Diogenes, is there anything I can do for you? And Diogenes says, yes, you could get out of my sun. You're blocking. Okay, and here is the great Prometheus who had stolen fire from Mount Olympus, from the gods, from Zeus himself. And Zeus punished him, had him chained to a rock, and every day an eagle would eat his liver. Okay. Another proto-Christ-like figure there in Prometheus. Later, Hercules came and slew the eagle and freed Prometheus. Prometheus Unbound, very famous poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley, the English Romantic poet. And here is Aristotle teaching Alexander the Great. He had him as a student for about 4 years, and Alexander, a Macedonian, was so impressed by the ancient Greeks that later on, when he would conquer virtually almost everything in the known world, he would bring Greek culture and philosophy and everything Greek to those places. Alexander the Great, when he went around with his conquests, he would have his men, like he was bringing back an alligator, bring these animals back to Aristotle so Aristotle could classify them. Aristotle was a zoologist, a biologist primarily. He invented the terms genus and species for classifying animals. He was a great biologist. Up until Darwin, he was the greatest one. Him, Linnaeus. There's a few other really good ones too, of course. And Aristotle was the greatest philosopher, perhaps the smartest person who ever lived. He classified all the known knowledge, worthwhile knowledge of his time. He was smarter than Plato. Okay, Plato wrote the Republic, which is magnificent and it's entertaining, and his books are better preserved than those of Aristotle. But Aristotle set the tone for what would lead to a free world and what would lead to the Carolingian Renaissance, the Merovingian Renaissance, the Scholasticism Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance. So here's the Alexandrian Empire. These are the areas conquered by Alexander the Great where he spread Greek culture. Here's Alexander the Great with one of his artists, Apelles, again, bringing Greek culture. Greeks were into painting and into sculpture. They were great at it. The Greek sculptures are really impressive. Here is now Cicero, who became the head of Rome. He rose from being a common man to being the big numero uno in Rome. And some people consider him the greatest orator of all time. And here he is speaking to the Senate, denouncing Catiline. And he loved the books. He had some Greek tutors when he was being raised, and he was fluent in Greek. He translated Greek books into Latin. Roman aristocrats had libraries, and they could read, Plato and Aristotle and the other Greek books. Okay, so Rome also was felt to be key for. Some people even say the purpose of the Roman Empire was to conquer much of the known world at that time so Christianity could be spread to all those places. Now, this is the guy who's the author of this book, Thomas Woods, author of How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization. He's a real smart guy. He's a Harvard professor. He's an economics expert, historian expert. And he especially also writes a lot about economics, and he says it was the Catholic Church scholars who figured out in scholasticism that capitalism was the best economic system because it rewards everybody. It encourages people. It incentivizes them to produce more. And that led to the development of the Austrian School of Economics. It was like the best school of economics. Whereas the Protestants got things wrong. They were too obsessed on price-value theory, and this mixed-up notion sort of led to Marxism, a disaster, okay, the loss of private property. Okay, we're going to stop right there. That's the end of part 3 of How the Catholic Church Built Civilization. I got a lot more beautiful slides coming up in just a little bit here.